they need help, they can start it on their own, but they need help. So this is capped brood, and they're starting to chew up. Workers, we said there were 3. The worker is a female bee. It's a fertilized egg. It has immature or non-developed ovaries, and it has many jobs over its lifetime. So the very first thing that bee has to do when it crawls out is turn right back around and polish the cell it came out of. So day 1. Its job is also to keep some of the other brood warm. By day 3, as its body matures, its job is to feed older larvae. So larva needs to be fed about 1,500 times a day. So you need a lot of bees to feed that. Between day 6 and 11, they're going to feed younger larvae. Well, the difference between feeding older larvae and feeding younger larvae is what is fed. Younger larvae are fed, or the younger eggs, technically, are fed royal jelly. Royal jelly is a secretion that comes from the bee's head. So it comes from bees once they reach about day 6, they're able to produce royal jelly. So that's why they switch over. For the first 3 days, every egg, fertilized or unfertilized, drone or worker, is fed royal jelly. After day 3, that changes. Day 12 to 17, they produce wax, they build comb, they transport food, and their attendance to the queen. So what happens is their bodies shift, they're able to do different things. They shift on day 18 to 21. Some of them will guard the hive. So between 18 to 21, they will sit at the front of the hive, they will look for anything that might be coming in that's foreign bees, wasps, skunks, bears, humans on a bad day. If you're in, like I said, I don't go in on the rainy, yucky days because the guard bees are right there. They are at attention. By day 22 to about day 35, or technically till about day 45, they forage. So they go out and they collect water and bring it back. They go out and they collect pollen and bring it back. They go out and they collect nectar and bring it back. They go out and collect a sticky resin called propolis, or propolis, depending on how you want to say it. And they bring that back. And what they do is they then give it to a bee who's between days 12 and 17. And it would be like, and that bee then is a house bee and puts it away. So it would be like when you and I go to the grocery store, if somebody was actually standing at the door saying, okay, I'm taking stuff to the refrigerator, somebody else is taking stuff to the cupboard, somebody else is taking your cleaning supplies, so they all have a job. And because that bee turns right around and goes back out. And then by day 35 to day 45 is the end of life for most bees. So they live 6 weeks, and they work themselves to death. Foraging is ultimately what kills them, because they're just exhausted. It's all that they can do. That's a worker bee. So she's got a lot of fuzz on her. Worker bees are all female. She's got her wings, which are nice and pretty and shiny. They're not chewed on. They don't look, exhausted. She's just a pretty bee. Their life cycle. So the queen lays an egg. We talked about that in the bottom of the cell. For the first 3 days, the bee is fed royal jelly. The egg is fed royal jelly. Then after that, the bees are fed one of 2 things. They're either fed a combination of pollen and nectar, which they call bee bread. Pollen is the protein source, and nectar is the carbohydrate. And it's mixed with some enzymes. So they're either fed that, or the egg is fed all royal jelly. Once it reaches its full growth, the workers will seal the cell. The larva then becomes a pupa, and an adult bee leaves the cell. So the difference between, I don't know if I've got a slide here, but I'm going to talk about it now. The difference between the 3 castes is a drone emerges in 23 days. So they're all capped at about day 9, and a drone emerges in 23 days. A worker emerges in about 21 days. And both of those are fed the bee bread. The queen, I said, was fed all royal jelly. She matures in 16 days. Drones and workers live 6 weeks, queens can live 6 years. The only difference between a worker bee, a female fertilized egg, and a queen bee, a female fertilized egg, or a fertilized egg, I should say, both female, is what they're fed. That's it. Yes?
Why would a hive create more queens?
Good question. A hive would create more queens because it doesn't like the queen it has.
They do not like their queen.
They cannot like their queen.
Oh.
There's all this discussion about who's really in charge. Is it the queen or is it the workers? Is it the bees? Pardon?
Market basket.
But, yeah. It is a great question. Timely comment too, there you go. But what happens is, if the queen didn't mate well, if she is putting out a lot of unfertilized eggs, the hive knows it's doomed. It knows that it does not have enough. It doesn't have enough bees to sustain it. And so it will take one of those fertilized eggs that it finds and just power feed it royal jelly. It will actually convert it. Hopefully it does it at the right time, because it's a longer story. But anyway, so they might decide. It might be that she's not a hygienic queen. Queens, as they're bred, if they don't breed really, they don't get that 18 to 20 drones, they're not good housekeepers. When I say they're not good housekeepers, it's not that they are housekeeping, it's that their offspring aren't good housekeepers. So maybe the hive is getting a little moldy because the bees aren't taking very good care of it. They know and they don't like it, so they will, again, try to make another queen. As soon as those queens emerge, because they'll make way more than one, what will happen is those queens will emerge, they make a piping sound to find the other queens, and then they'll go, and queens don't have a barb on their stinger, and queens will only sting other queens. So they'll go to those queen cells and they will sting and kill the queen in there. They'll go and find the existing queen, and they'll duke it out to see who wins, and whoever wins is who you get. And sometimes it'll be the old queen, most of the time it'll be the new queen.
And what do the workers do? Will they just watch?
They take sides.
Do they really?
They totally take sides.
Wow.
Especially if multiple queens hatch at the same time, because remember I said 16 days? I literally mean 16 days. So if there were 2 eggs that were laid within a few seconds of each other, they're going to emerge within a few seconds of each other. It's not like humans where the gestation period is 9 months. It's 16 days, like a certain number of hours. So they'll come out and they'll kind of vie for who they think. They have their little posse. So she'll emerge and off they'll go. The other thing is the queen could die. So the queen gives off a pheromone, and that's how she communicates. She sends signals that pheromone around the bees, and then the bees that are around her touch other bees, and they touch other bees, so that message is communicated. And it says a whole lot of different things. If that pheromone goes away, if you take the queen out, within an hour the bees will know there's no queen there. And then they make a determination as to whether they're going to get a new queen or not. So, smart, smart, smart.
They make one?
They can. They'll take a fertilized egg and just start feeding it royal jelly. Because remember, the only difference between a worker and a queen is what they're fed. Workers get bee bread after 3 days. Queens get royal jelly. All right, we did all of this. You are what you eat. Man, it just makes me want to eat royal jelly. So here are the 3 casts of pictures side by side to make it a little bit easier. You look at the eyes are one of the first things. So on the drone, they're right on top of the head, whereas the other 2 bees, they're kind of on the side. Drones are easily confused from new beekeepers as queens because they are larger. You look at the wings, that's probably the biggest telltale sign is the wings on a queen, on a mated queen, are always shorter than the body. Significantly shorter. That's what an egg looks like in a cell. As a new beekeeper, they are wicked hard to see. So we do recommend that people use magnifying glasses or get the readers for glasses that they're taking a look at. And the first day that an egg is laid, it stands straight up in the cell. By day 2, it's laying tipped, and by day 3, it's laying flat. By day 4, it's in a pool of what looks like spit. Then they're feeding that it turns into the larva and it starts to curl and get larger and larger. So here's some larvae. Let's see. Down here, it's a little tiny larva, just looks like spit. these start to get a little bigger, 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 so as they grow. And then by day 9, they're capped off with wax. Those are the pupas of the cross section, so the ones on the left are a little bit younger than the ones on the right. The ones on the right are starting to get their color and they're starting to get ready to emerge. So they pupate. These are some pictures of pollen and nectar. So the shiny stuff is the nectar, and the yellowish kind of stuff is actually pollen, which the bees have covered in wax, because pollen starts to degrade the minute that they collect it and bring it back. Exposure to air creates a problem for it. It starts to degrade immediately. So they'll stuff it in there, they'll pack it in as tightly as they can get it, and they will go ahead and cover it with wax. That's a bee frolicking in the pollen. And that's once it's taken its comb and stuffed it into the pollen baskets on the back and bringing it into the hive. Wax. So when you and I eat too many carbohydrates and too much sugar, we put on fat. That's what happens. We start to look like healthy Americans, over healthy Americans, right? When a bee does it, they actually create wax, which comes out in scales. So underneath the bee, you'll see wax scales. They'll then take their legs and they will pull it out in sheets and then use their mandible to shape it into the hive. So as a new beekeeper, we need our bees to have lots and lots of nectar. So we feed them a sugar syrup as long as they'll take it, because they need it to create the wax for their hive. More pictures of the wax glands. How do bees communicate? Through waggle dance. Absolutely fascinating to see. So what happens is the foragers will take off and they go out foraging, right? They go out to find the market basket, or Hannaford market basket closed. Whatever it is they have to go find. Some are looking for water, some are looking for pollen, some are looking for nectar. So they will all fly off. The foragers will race back, and it's like a dance-off. They are going to come back and communicate to the rest of the hive what they found, where it is, and how good the source is. And they do that through a waggle dance. So their movement side to side, depending upon the length, tell the bees where it is. The speed at which they move tells them how good the source is. And as they go from left to right in almost that figure 8, they say how far it is. So they communicate, and then everybody in the hive decides where they're going to go. So we have 14 colonies in the backyard now. In the morning, some are going, they're going in, each hive has decided it's going in a different direction, because as the worker came back, the forager came back, it communicated something differently.
Do the hives get along with each other?
They don't not get along. We keep them far enough apart, so when a bee leaves the hive, what it does is it has the equivalent as to a geolocator in it. So as it leaves the hive, it does a circular dance or a circular flight around, and it's just like you and I hitting the home button on our GPS, and then it takes off, and then it will come back to exactly that same spot. So if I have a hive here in the morning, and I move it more than 2 feet away, the bees won't find it. They'll go right back there. That's home, not here. And that's how they communicate where the flowers and where the forage is. So there is sometimes drift. So when you have hives that are only 3 or 4 feet apart, you've got these bees coming in with pollen and nectar, and they're flying low, and they're heavy, and they're tired. If that hive is closer than mine, I might accidentally stop there. So as I show up at the door, and if I showed up at your house with steak and beer or Kool-Aid, you might just let me in. But if I showed up and said, I'm hungry, you might not let me in. So it'll all depend.
So a foreign bee could adapt to a new hive?
Yes, absolutely. What we don't do is combine 2 hives, because they are attracted to the pheromone of their own queen. And so if we combine two hives, we'll do it in the fall sometimes, but there's a specific way we do it so that the bees don't attack the existing queen. Because I like my queen, and now suddenly I get close enough to the foreign queen, and it's not going to be pretty. We talked about pheromones. These bees are fanning. So they're in front of the hive, and they are doing one of a couple things. They have a nasonoph gland, which is by their stinger. It emits a pheromone, and if it's a fear pheromone, they're flapping their wings to get that fear pheromone spread as quickly as they can to tell the rest of the hive there's a problem. Brace yourself. They might be spreading that pheromone around, which is communicating where food is or where there's a great source of water. And they might actually be cooling down the hive. So when honeybees bring nectar back to the hive, it's about 85% water. And they have to reduce it down to about 17% water. So they have to create dehydration inside the hive. So they're bringing in water to consume, and they're dehydrating the nectar source. So they'll do that through fanning as well. Talked about piping. It's actually the G. If you want to know the exact sound of it, it's kind of cool when you hear it. You will notice when you go into your hive, if your bees are not happy, that when you lift the top off the hive, boy, do they get loud. No, you want to be careful. That's your first message. So the volume of the sound, not the volume of the piping, but the volume of just your bees in general will tell you something. When you're setting up your beehives, location, location, location. They need to have access to water. Ideally, you want water about 20 feet away from the bees. Make sure it's not your neighbor's pool. Otherwise, your neighbors will be calling you, and you probably have the zoning board or somebody knocking on your door wanting to talk to you about that. You should always check your local town to see what the ordinance is for bees. There are ordinances in towns all over the state. Some towns don't have ordinances, but it will tell you how many colonies you can have, how far from your property line they need to be, if they need what's called a flyaway zone. So that would be an area, I can keep bees 15 feet from my neighbor's property. Some places, Concord, we just worked to get the zoning laws changed, which worked really, really well because it was very prohibitive. But a flyaway might be a hedge that's 6 feet tall. So the bees come out and they won't go through the hedge, they'll go up over it. So if they go up over it, then there's less concern about what's on the other side. So being good neighbors is really important because we don't want our neighbors to get stung. We don't want to create unnecessary fear. And I certainly don't want to create an issue with my neighbors. So being really cognizant of your neighbors, and especially if they're not neighbors you're fond of or they're not fond of you, let's put up as little stink as we can with them. So they need access to water. They also need sun. Some of the books you'll read and some of the things you'll see will say dappled sunlight. Well, dappled sunlight is great in Georgia, but dappled sunlight is not needed here in New Hampshire. They need as much sunlight as they can from as early in the morning as possible to as late in the day. They should face south, maybe a tiny bit southeasterly, so the opening is faced that way because you want that sun to hit them first thing in the morning so that they can go ahead and fly, and you want it to head around the south so they'll fly as long as possible. And then you'll hear, hopefully, the bear presenter next week when he speaks, we'll talk a bit about bear fences. Bear fences are required in the state of New Hampshire, not by law, but I know more beekeepers than I would care to tell you who installed their hive, and within 24 hours a bear found it and knocked it out. And there's an incredible amount of damage. The bears are not after the honey, although they will eat it, they're after the brood. They're after the protein. And they will decimate a hive. So this year the bears have been so bad that typically we recommend just a 3-strand fence. We're now recommending 4-strand fences because they're getting pretty creative.
Do electric fences or what?
Electric fences. You can do solar, battery powered, or you can actually plug them into standard electricity. But you really need to have them, and you need to use them, and you need to replace the battery or recharge the battery frequently. Because if they're not strong, bears will test, and they will continue to test. And if they find one weakness, that's it. And once they know, it's just like a bird feeder. They're going to come back again and again and again.
What happens if the bees went into the electric fence? Aren't they going to get electrocuted and die? And what if a lot of bees don't see it and they hit and you could end up killing your hive?
That would be happen, wouldn't it? It's a great question. So have you ever seen a bird that's been sitting up on an electricity wire outside your house? So it's the same thing. In order for the electricity to go through the bee or go through you or I, we have to be touching the ground. So since the bees aren't touching the ground at the same time they're touching the wire, it would be okay. Just like if a bird sat on it. Kind of cool, huh? All right, so location, location, location. Sunny, south to southeast facing, dry, not too boggy wet. If it's down too low, you'll have a real problem. Access to water, make sure it's set back. Protected from high winds, people and critters, and accessible for maintenance. So you need to be able to get to it. High winds, you really don't want. They can create a problem. When I say keeping it protected from people, many of us disguise our hives. There are hives on rooftops in Manhattan. You don't need to be in a rural area. There's plenty of forage in Manhattan for these bees to get to as long as they don't saturate the market too much. But I have hives that are painted like brick chimneys. Sitting on a roof, you will never tell that it's a beehive. Paint them like cinder blocks. You'll never be able to tell. Some people camouflage them by painting them camouflage or green and paint trees on them. The bees will still find them. Their little geolocators will get them there. Most of us paint our hives white. It doesn't much matter what color. The bees can't see red. Dark hives in the south where it's 100 degrees all the time might be a problem. It's not a problem up here. We get a couple of 100-degree days. It's not a big deal. So, again, mine are standard white. Mine are fairly out in the open. My neighbors all know they're there. I have an electric fence. But I know people who, kids can be a problem. Not just kids, but people can be a problem. They either see them and now they're upset about them. You know you've got somebody knocking on your door. Or they see them and for some reason they're just tempted to do dumb things like throw rocks at them or try to get at them. And we have had some thefts lately.
With the access to water, how much water, and you said within 20 feet?
I said within 20 feet, ideally. It can be further away. What a lot of people will do is put out some bird baths. They like dirty, crappy, yucky water, so it doesn't have to be clean water. It can be horrid water and they're fine. I will tell you though, if you live on a farm or near a farm, that you want to make sure they have some clean water. Because honey is mixed with water, I have on rare occasion, or I shouldn't say I know people who have tasted honey and have judged honey that smelled just like the cow and tasted like the cow pasture next door. You're not going to want to give that to the neighbor. They're for sure not going to want bees around. So a lot of people will put out the kiddie pools, or they'll put out a fountain. You know, just get one of those solar operated fountains so that they've got water. Zoning, bee laws, the state of New Hampshire has just updated. If you just type in HER 1800 in the code of rules, you'll see what they are. Zoning, you want to check your own area. And then the big thing is we use every opportunity to educate our friends and family and people about bees and what they do. We want to be responsible. You know, I can say it's my right to have bees, but if I've got a neighbor that's not happy about that, it can really wreak havoc. We talk about responsibility. People are concerned about stinging. It's a horrible picture, but the woman on the left, underneath her left armpit, that's actually a swarm covering that tree. So that's all bees from about 2 feet above her head down to almost the base of that tree, and she doesn't seem to be too concerned about them. The one thing I would be concerned about is she has absolutely no eye or face protection, and I don't ever advocate anyone do that. I don't go out without eye and face protection. A gift of honey goes a long way to your neighbors. If you're going to get bees, the promise of honey and pollination goes a long way too, but buy some local honey and give that. I'm not going to go into the different types of honeybees, given that we're getting close on time here. But they're not native to the U.S. They came over with the colonies, and they were called the white man's fly. There are different kinds. They have different traits. When you order them, they come 3 pounds with a maiden queen, and that's 2 packages, and that's how we bring them home in the back seat of the car. You know, they're going to stay with the queen. So if you'll notice on this package that's right here, on this box, There are actually a few bees that are right here on the outside. They're gonna hang on, they're not gonna go anywhere, because they wanna stay right with that queen. And inside that is also a can that's got some sugar syrup in it. Basic costs. Again, I don't go too far. A lot of this is gonna depend upon whether you make your own equipment. If you're a woodworker and you've got spare wood around, you're not gonna pay as much as those of us who maybe are not handy with woodenware. There are a bunch of bee suppliers. I would always suggest people go on and take a look. You can go on the internet and see what kind of boxes there are, what you think you want. Bee school subscriptions, reading, probably $100 is a pretty good estimate, and that's a first-year cost. You're not going to need that afterwards. You might have memberships. Most of the bee club memberships in the state are $15 for an individual, $20 for a family. It's not going to break the bank. You've got your equipment, tools, and clothing. Some people buy a bee brush, which they use to move bees around. Others are going to take a turkey feather. The bee brush is going to be $12. The turkey feather is going to be free. You choose what you want to use. Beekeepers are notorious for finding ways to cut costs. Clothing, depending upon what you want to wear, bee suits can cost $100 in and of themselves. So you want to take a look at what you want for you. Bees, $90 to $135 per hive. So that's a first-year cost. If you're a good beekeeper, you don't have to pay that year after year. As a matter of fact, if you're a good beekeeper, you can take one hive and the following year split it into 2 or 3, and you can grow more bees. Yes?
The bees die during the fall or no?
Bees die 6 weeks after they're born, 6 weeks after they emerge, and so there's constantly new bees. But when we get into the fall, the bees actually live a little bit longer. The queen, around about August 1st, starts to lay a bee that has a few more fat cells. So it actually lives longer, and because it doesn't forage as long, it doesn't wear itself out as quickly. Yes?
If you're going to start a hive, how late is too late in the year to start it? I mean, they need a certain amount of time to get food and get prepared for winter, right?
They do. If you have brand new equipment, nothing other, you're just starting, second week of June is the latest you want to start. And even at that, you have to monitor very carefully. You have to make sure they have plenty of food, that they're never without it, that you're in there monitoring. If you had the second year, you could wait a little bit longer. And what some people will do is they'll buy nucleus colonies. So a nucleus colony is a smaller version. Instead of having 10 frames, it has 5. And it has a mated queen who's already laying. It'll have some brood and it'll have bees in it. So instead of buying that package of bees, which you're going to dump into a box that they have to work on, you're taking 5 frames that are already worked, that already have brood and that already have bees, putting it into that 10-frame box, and they'll take off much more quickly. And so if time is of the essence, you would do that. However, you're going to pay $135 to $235 for those bees. Medication and food. So food is sugar syrup, so you get really good at finding who has the best price on sugar. We now buy it in buy anywhere between 25 and 100-pound bags. And 42 cents per pound is pretty good right now. I've been through about 500 pounds of sugar so far this year. Times your number of colonies. The experience, though, is priceless. That was me my first year in beekeeping. As I told you, I dress a little differently than my husband does, but my face and my head is always covered. We had 2 colonies. And that is probably, remember I said 30, that's a deep frame, so there's 3,500 cells on that. So that probably has about 2,500 bees on that side, on that one side alone.
Hello? Yeah.
All right. A lot of information. What questions do you have?
Do you collect and process the honey yourself or in your wax?
We do. So in the fall, what we'll do is we will take and that's the beauty belonging to a club as well, is I don't have to have a lot of equipment. Many of the clubs or people in the clubs, beekeepers are great. They just want to share and just talk about bees. It's that crazy farmer part. We do own an extractor. So an extractor is essentially, there's some plastic, we have a metal one that has frames inside it. They can be hand cranked or electrified, and it's a centrifuge. So I'm going to take that frame that I just the frame that I was holding. It's all capped over, telling me that the bees have cured it down as far as possible, and then they've covered it over. I'm gonna take that out. I'm gonna take off just a little bit of the wax, just the cap of the wax. You can do that with a hot knife that you can use an electrified knife, or you can use a scratching tool to just kind of rake some of that off. Put it in the centrifuge, and as it spins, it's gonna spin all the honey to the outside. It'll drain down, and then I can funnel it through. I mean, it's not processed, it goes through. I have some people who, they want any bee parts and any wax as well, and they will pay extra for it. And then others, yeah, sometimes a little leg gets in there or a wing. It's good for you, it tickles going down. It sounds disgusting, I know. But you can use just a double sieve as well. There are special sieves that are made that'll catch any of those pieces and parts. And then you just jar it, just put it in bottles. So yes, we do that. And the wax cappings, because remember I told you we have the brood chamber, which are the boxes that the bees live in. And if I am going to do any kind of a treatment, put any kind of a chemical, even an organic chemical, and there are plenty of organic things we put in to try to keep the mites down and keep the bees healthy. I never do that with my honey supers on. So my honey supers is my honey. So when I take the caps off that, they have not come in contact with anything other than maybe once I put them back on the bees, there might be some residue in the bottom that the bees have taken up. That goes into cosmetics, lip balm, hand cream, all of that kind of stuff. So yes.
How much honey do you get per hive?
Great question. So for a good colony in this part of the country, if you're a really good beekeeper, you can get anywhere between 50 and 125 pounds per hive.
That's a lot of money. I get way more than I was expecting.
Yeah. Some people get 30. So it depends. You know, again, it really depends on what you do and how you do it. So it goes fast. Like your friends and family all want it. And you know, a word about honey. So the honey on the shelves in the store, in most of the stores, has been through a process whereby it's been heated so that it doesn't crystallize. It stays liquid all the time. Because when you and I want honey, we want to pour it out of the jar. We want it to be pretty, we want it to be amber, we want it to be liquid. And that's all well and good. But that heating process takes out a lot of the proteins, a lot of the amino acids. It starts to break down a lot of what is good for us. And they have to eat it in order to get it out of the comb faster, get it processed, get it handled, and so we'll buy it. So when you go to the store, you're going to buy honey that's A, not local, and B, it's a great sweetener as far as I'm concerned. It's a wonderful sweetener. But a lot of us want the honey for is because we've heard it might be good for allergies. It's got a lot of beneficial proteins in it. That you have to get locally because you want it to be from the flowers that you're sensitive to. And you don't want it heated because you don't want that to happen. The downside is good honey crystallizes. When it gets a little bit cool, crystallization signifies that the bees have taken a lot of the water out. So it's more potent. It's really good. And you can reheat it by taking your jar and putting it in really warm water, not above about 108 degrees. So your hot tub's a perfect temperature. Too bad you just can't swim in there.
The jar of honey?
Exactly. You just take the jar of honey and with you.
Sit down there.
Exactly. Wait for it to uncrystallize. But the other thing about honey is honey will, beekeepers haven't gotten smart about the price of honey. A bee will have to visit, a bee in her lifetime makes 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. 1/12 of a teaspoon. And yet our maple producers have gotten really smart about charging for maple syrup. As beekeepers, we haven't been very smart about it. So I think you'll start to see the price of local honey go up a little bit at the farmers markets because it needs to. If you're buying that much sugar to get your bees to build up, and then you're paying all these expensive prices for bee suits and hardware and your time, it has to go up to make it reasonable where people will continue to do it. Yes.
Once you were already established with beehives, why are you feeding them that much sugar?
So there's a couple reasons I might feed. So right now, we're in a dearth. There's no nectar out there. If I don't provide them with nectar, what'll end up happening is the queens are smart enough to know that there isn't food coming in, I better stop laying eggs. So now, they start to diminish in population. Now when the nectar flow hits, I have a reduced workforce. So I might actually take my honey supers off the hive, feed them some sugar syrup to stimulate growth, because that nectar stimulates the queen to produce eggs and to continue to lay eggs. And then as soon as the nectar flow hits, I'm pulling that feeder and slapping my honey supers back on, and they'll go out.
Pretty much gotta know what's in bloom and what they're feeding on.
You do. You
Unless
really
you
do.
plant them in the garden.
Which is what we all can do, even if you don't want to be beekeepers. The big thing about planting a garden is making sure that the seeds and the plants you get are not coated in neonicotinoids, which is a word that's been thrown around a lot, and there's some controversy over it, but it's been banned in many European countries. There's still no conclusive proof that that's what's one of the factors that call for colony collapse disorder, or that's killing bees. But our bees are suffering. They're suffering because we don't have as much forage. So urban sprawl has been an impact. And they're dying because we have monocultures. So almonds are grown in an area about the size of Rhode Island in California, and they bloom for 2 weeks a year. When they bloom, 80% of the US population bees are thrown on a truck and driven to that area. They are then taken off by, the tractor trailer loads are taken off by forklift, and they sit there waiting for the bloom. And those bees are starving. And so your bees go, and your bees go, and your bees go, and your bees go. And you're a great beekeeper, but I'm not such a good beekeeper. So mine are not really healthy bees, but